The Voice referendum has shown the difficulty in achieving consensus on any constitutional change in this country. It also shows that despite media, government and business pulling in the same direction, the community might not be in sync with them. The question for business is whether it's dangerous from their image and reputation point of view to back something where their customers, shareholders or suppliers might be moving in a different direction. Now, somebody who's thought about this is Mark Humphery-Jenner, Associate Professor in the School of Banking and Finance at the University of New South Wales, who joins me now. Mark, always good to chat to you. This is a real issue about what is the purpose of business. Is it to create social change? Is it to actually make the best widget they possibly can? And try to reconcile that as a board, as a chief executive, that's a pretty difficult thing to do these days.
It absolutely is, and thanks for having me. And when you're looking at a corporation, they really need to consider what are they legally obligated to do. And what they're legally obligated to do is really go out and act in shareholders' best interests. That's in the Corporations Act. That's what the directors have to do, which means they need to go out and make the best widget. Now, often making the best widget also involves treating the employees right, involves treating customers right, involves having a good relationship with government where necessary, because that's going to help them make the best widget. But the primary responsibility is to their shareholders.
So we hear a lot about greenmail, where effectively people try to pump up their environmental credentials to make themselves look good. We see it all the time in corporate and social responsibility. The amount of money that is spent effectively trying to make that business look good, which you wonder might be disguising something at the back end. So again, this whole issue of coming forward on social issues has got to be addressed with a certain amount of cynicism.
Oh, absolutely. So look at FTX. Think about what Sam Bankman-Fried said about ESG, environmental, social and governance. He said that as long as you say the right things, people might get off your back. That's why he was donating so much to political parties, why he was going out making so much noise about ESG. You look at the ESG score for FTX, it was pretty good. You look at the ESG score for a company like Tesla, it's not great and is actually beaten by Chevron and Exxon. You look at those ESG scores and you think, what exactly gives here? So there's absolutely a lot of greenwashing and various other things going on.
Well, you talk about Bankman-Fried, and the one thing that came out of the trial this week of Bankman-Fried was really when his former girlfriend and former chief executive of Almeida said he considered the political donations he made as an investment, as a good investment that might ultimately lead him to the White House. So this is where the motives of a business, doesn't matter whether it's the Voice, doesn't matter whether it's any social good, has got to be at least raised in question by shareholders and raised in questions by the community.
Absolutely. So the shareholders need to question what's happening with their money. Why is the company supporting this particular cause or that particular political party? Sometimes it can be good for shareholders, sometimes not. So I have a colleague at UNSW who wrote a paper titled Agency Conflicts of Corporate Philanthropy, getting at the idea that officers and directors might take shareholder money and donate it to their own personal political causes or pet causes, taking someone else's money and using it for personal reasons. And shareholders really need to be watching out for that.
Okay, so this is, you're right, the philosophy. But in this particular case, you had the Business Council, you had 14 of the top Australian publicly listed companies, you had all of the banks, all of the big mining companies, all in support of this. Now, in many ways, some of those companies might have actually been affected had sort of, if you like, the Voice taken its place to treaty, gone to other areas that might have been detrimental to those companies and indeed their shareholders.
Absolutely. So say the Voice were to get off the ground. Well, if that were to happen, you have to think about what are the implications. One of the implications is, for example, treaty. Linda Burney is on video saying that a treaty would be the goal underlying the Voice. And as a result, many of these mining companies, BHP, Rio, for example, they could have been adversely affected. So you need to think about what were the business purposes behind supporting the Voice. And as far as I could gather, there were probably two overarching ones that could have driven it. If we're being generous and thinking they're acting in shareholders' best interests. One, they might have feared being bullied by people who supported the Voice, so bullied by the Yes campaign. Two, they might have feared being bullied by the government and losing government contracts or government favour if they didn't support the Yes campaign. Neither of those is good. That is not a good outcome to really be buying into, having to appease people by supporting a cause just to not get backlash. That's a major concern. And you're seeing that with some of these companies. What did they think they were actually going to gain out of this investment in the Voice.
Okay, so then you go to a BHP or a Rio. Of course, they do operate in many cases where they've got to cooperate with Aboriginal communities to operate on their lands. They would have a lot of employment opportunities for Indigenous people right around the country. So again, it's this balancing act. But the question is whether you lose anything by saying nothing in these social matters, whether it's actually being the best employer you can possibly be, the best supplier you possibly can be, and the best company for your shareholders.
Absolutely. So if the company goes up to their employees or their customers and says, we think you should make an informed decision in the referendum, go out and find out for yourselves what is best in your opinion. I don't think anyone's going to begrudge that. And to some extent, that's looking like a good corporate citizen. It probably won't cost them much money. But donating millions of dollars, which does risk perhaps polarising your employee base, creates problems. Now, say we're looking at BHP and Rio. Well, they're already listening to Indigenous communities themselves. They already have, to some extent, a mini voice going to that company. So the voice going to the government, it might perhaps play well with some of their employees, but it's not clear universally it will, because recent polling suggests that it isn't even 80% of Indigenous people who support the voice. It might be, say, 59%, in which case one has to wonder, well, do the employees who are Indigenous support the voice at that company? It is a live question.
Yeah, and this also should at least be on the radar of all company boards going forward with the many other social questions that will come up, because this even raises the questions about, well, if we can get companies across the line on this one, how many other live issues can we actually try and get them across the line on in the future?
Absolutely, and it does really raise the fear you're going to get more corporations really lining up behind political parties. Now, that's happened in the United States, happened a little bit in Australia, but they've tended to stay out of it. They haven't tended to outright back Labor, outright back Liberal. But if they're perhaps backing one cause, does that extend to other political parties and federal elections as well?
Which is almost like the trickle-down effect from the Clive Palmer, creating his own political party and then backing it with his own money.
Exactly. And it's not clear that shareholders want their companies backing it either, because looking at the recent Resolve polling, only 29% of people want companies actually involved in this. So if companies are really going to go down this route, well, it leads to a slippery path of perhaps alienating their shareholders, alienating their customers, and alienating perhaps one side of politics that isn't actually going along with what the company is promoting.
Mark Humphery-Jenner, it's always good to get your insights. Many thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.